The mantra is repeated over and over and over again, and it's within that repetition that allows the mind to sort of settle and opens up the space for guidance. So it is why we use the rosary. It is why the Tibetans use the beads. It is why the Hindus and Indians use a mantra. So these are important tools. The pulling of your cords are important tools. Our prayers are important tools to open up the space. But thoughts, there's two things I want to point out here. So I'm going to point out number 2 before number 1. So there's 2 things that I want to point out here. Number 2 first is that the guidance speaks through different mediums than, not medium like a medium, but like medium meaning like how it speaks, than words and thoughts, right? So the Centinela and guidance speaks through motion, through movement, through sound, through music, through mantra, which is sound in motion, and through shifting and changing. Shifting and changing, so music shifts and changes. Movement, dance, motion shifts and changes. Mantras are sound in motion. So the key to listening to the Centinela is to learn how the Centinela speaks to you. So when we teach our students to start the communication process between themselves and the Centinela, what we teach them is to ask, how do I listen to you? And how do you speak to me? So the Centinela may speak to you in different ways than you listen to the Centinela. So the Centinela can guide you in how I speak to you is through, you may get like a knowing of like when you're cooking food, that's when the Centinela's voice can come clear, right? That's like how the Centinela can speak to you. Well, how do I listen? Through that knowing. So your first 2 steps of developing your relationship with your Centinela is to start the conversation. How do I speak? Or how do you speak to me? And how do I listen to you? So that's number 2, and we'll go into that most likely in this class or next class about that exact process. Because we have 5 questions for you to ask the Centinela. And the first 2 are those first 2. And through these 5 questions is what rounds out a conversation beginning with your Centinela. But just like any person or any developing relationship, you don't just run up to someone you don't know and start asking them questions and expect that they're going to respond to you, right? It's a developed relationship. There has to be like a time that you put into it for the Centinela to really start to speak to you and for you to learn how to listen. This is important because how you listen and how your Centinela speaks are going to match the importance or the way or the purpose of your life path. All right? So if you're a magician, you're meant to be a magician, and your Centinela is a magus, right? And how you listen is through working magic, you're going to be on point. Do you see what I'm saying? Because that's your path. But let's say you're a magician, you're meant to be a magician. You have all these beliefs that magic is wrong, that magic is casting spells and changing things, that it's against your religion, so on and so forth, right? You have all those beliefs influencing the listening and the receiving of the guidance of the Centinela, and then therefore the unfoldment of your life path. All right? So if you try to listen to the Centinela, say by going on a boat ride or sitting in the sun or going to church, maybe some of the things that you used to do in your life that would bring you a sense of quote unquote rest and peace, listening to spirit forcing the spirit to speak through mediums that do not work for you is going to work against you connecting with the Sentinella, and it's also going to go against your life path. So when we say be open, we say be open to who you are. Do you know who you are? Absolutely not. That's what you're here to learn. Can we tell you who you are? Yes, but we're not going to. We are going to give you the tools to allow it to develop and to unfold. And when that happens, it traces back to the natural mode that you had when you were young. So that's why we say Sanse, and our work draws people back to a natural empowerment, a flow, and an innocence. It's that innocence. You were born that way. And maybe as you're connecting with your Sentinella, if your Sentinella is guiding you to be a magician, you'll have memories of childhood, of working with those herbs outside, of picking those plants, of making your little magical potions and your little things that you did when you were a child. Same thing. Let's say you've always wanted to be a magus or a witch, but it's not in your path. Let's say you're meant to be a healer, right? And so the way that the Sentinella would speak to you and the way that you would listen is through sickness. And it would make sense then to you, like, oh, that's why I always had all these various illnesses, or that's why I always had to cure these really strange things as I was growing up. Yes, because it's going to be in your life that the Sentinella is always guiding you. The moment you listen, the illness subsides and the teaching can start to begin. But let's say you got a degree and you got that degree in chemical science. Your mind is going to battle the natural core of the Sentinella. The mind is going to start to go to work on, well, how can I really make money being a healer? Or maybe I can do it this way. Your mind is going to come in, that chemical engineer mind is going to come in and cut and destroy. Relieving yourself of the tool of the mind and going deeper into listening, first and foremost, to how do you listen and how does your Sentinella speak to you. That's always step one. Number one of what I was saying, so that was number two. Number one of what I was saying here is that in order to get to the point of listening and receiving clarity, you have to be willing to be stronger than all of the beliefs. Can you battle those beliefs? You can't. Can you understand them? You can't. You could spend your lifetime trying to unwind and disconnect all of the various beliefs. So what we say is just ignore it. Just allow it to be. Ignore the power of the thinking. Ignore all of that. And this is number one of what I want to share with you, which is not going to make sense to you, most of you. Your thoughts do not exist in your mind. This is this big. Your brain is about this big. Now look, take your eyes literally and look around the room that you're in right now. Look at all that you can see on to the right and the left of you, above you, below you, in front of you, behind you. Your mind cannot control the reality that you live in. Every one of your thoughts is given to you by the physical structure that you have around you. So if you want to change your thinking, you change your environment. If you want a connection with your sentinella, you put something in your environment to make that connection real. You want change in your life, you need to go outside and take a walk. You want to have flow in your life, you need to go sit by a river or an ocean and let that element be in your space. See, humans are funny little creatures because they think this little tiny thing that is inside of their skull is this complex world of thinking. It can't be. It is the physical structures around you that give you your thinking. As the sentinella arises in the communication with you, the first guidance that you receive is guidance in changing your physical space, guidance in changing how you dress, guidance in changing how you look, guidance in creating a sacred altar. The reason why the spirit comes to you is because of the altar. Because the altar is now physical in your space, and so now you have a space in your mind for spirit. This is why we dress the way we dress in our ceremony. This is why we have the pieces around us in our sacred space. This is why a person who is truly evolving and growing and changing is always looking different, because there's new spaces opening up, new things coming through, new things that are happening. The natural flow of life is change. Change is not the same thing that they say in Buddhism, right? They say change and suffering. That's a farce. Suffering is not something that's handed to you when you're born. It's part of what's handed to you, but when change is taking place and movement is happening and sound is happening, there is a reason why we use the bells. There is a reason why we have these structures for existence. Something cannot exist. Spirit walks through with nothing to make it exist. So as you're developing your relationship with your sentinella, you're learning to listen, and you're learning to understand how the sentinella speaks to you. That we know is working depending on if you're shifting and changing your environment. Your environment then is going to shift and change that structure of the mind. That's a lot, what I just said. But if you can just kind of get into those two pieces, that the sentinella could never speak through words to you. It has to speak through motion. It has to speak through flow, through some sort of energy exchange. And how that energy exchange is exchanged with you is very personal to you and very much about your life path. And so as that life path opens up, so does the changing in your environment.